Before our prediction show, a prediction. What is the key issue that will dominate the first session of Bill Lee's term as governor? Susan.
Wow. I think one of them, and maybe the key, might be career technical education. It's something he talked about throughout the campaign. He's devoted to it. He really believes that we need additional training in the careers.
I actually think it's more of a philosophy. We have such a massive turnover in state government. We'll have a new speaker, and we have the same lieutenant governor, but a new governor, or likely the same lieutenant governor. And it's going to be interesting to watch the dynamics of the personalities and what Governor Lee can get done.
All right, we'll watch that legislation and legislative session as it develops, certainly in January. We'll see you next week for big predictions here on Inside Tennessee.